Thank you so much, Professor Banks, for sending me your paper in advance, so I had a chance to look at it. Do you hear me? Yes. That's good. I want to be heard. We can agree upon one thing. James Baldwin should be a favorite. Yeah. I agree with you with almost everything you say, and there's a lot of things I would like to discuss further with you, which we perhaps could do later. I would like to discuss this assimilation or unity versus diversity thing is very, very important, I think. And I also want to discuss your use of the word cultural identification as something else than a local, national, or global identification, because as a humanity person, I always think that culture is everywhere, but it's always located somewhere. It's in a spatial context. Culture doesn't exist outside the local, national, global. So that's an important. But my point of departure is, like Sven told you, I'm trained and I teach within history didactics. Many people think that history didactics or subject didactics is about teaching methods in school, but that's just a very little bit of the whole. History didactics deals with what we should teach, why we should teach it, and how a little bit, and for whom we should teach. And these great questions is very important also when it comes to discuss how history is important to human rights and citizenship education and vice versa. I think the most important, it was said here earlier that purposes of teaching is one of the most important thing we can give to teacher students or student teachers, is that you have to have a purpose for your teaching. Without a purpose, you just be an average teacher and not able to fulfill your goals as a teacher. To say it with Professor Keith Barton, he was in Trondheim some months ago, he said that if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything as a teacher. So that's very important. And Professor Barton himself is one of the very important agents for how history, above all, should be, how to raise and foster democratic citizens. You say that history has a role to play, and that's also what I want to say. I was asked to say something about history related to your paper. And then I must go here to change. Nothing happens. Okay. Okay. History is a really debated school subject. And what is that? History is politics. But the last decades, the right-wing politicians in particular have been thinking about this multicultural society. It's a problem. What should we do to integrate them, assimilate them into our societies? And then One of their answers has been, we have to strengthen the canon within history teaching. We have to strengthen our national histories so that all the foreigners coming into our countries should learn what this country is really about, this nation is about. And that, of course, has led to many struggles in all these countries, because there are other perspectives given by historians, left-wing politicians, and so on, that you have to bring in more perspectives. You can't tell immigrants that our history is the only important one. You have to give them the opportunity to empower when they recognize their own history and are respected for that. So that's just some of the books that takes up this challenge, just to mention. Well, I've read a lot of the papers on human rights and citizenship education over the last years, and these are some of the positive words we use when talking about it. We want to foster tolerance, mutual respect, intercultural understanding, empowerment, and critical thinking. The only problem for me as a historian working with sources, what does this mean, what does that mean? I'm not sure whether I understand what this means. Tolerance. What are we going to tolerate? Everything? Every person? Every speech? Every opinion? Every action? Where's the limits? And also mutual respect. What are you going to respect? Everything? Every action? And so on. Intercultural understanding is also can be a bit tricky. We should be a bit more concrete sometimes, I think. I think empowerment and critical thinking, on the other hand, is not so much perhaps it's not the aims, but the means of getting to a better society. I want to talk about how empowerment looks like in history, because we have another word for empowerment. We share the same goal of getting empowered citizens, but how do we do that in history teaching? That is by what we call fostering historical thinking or historical consciousness. Historical consciousness is about seeing oneself as a product of history. We stand on someone's shoulders. But we are also producers of history, both products and producers. That is because historical consciousness deals with how past, present, and future are connected, are linked together. We cannot think about the future and our expectations without bringing with us all the things we know from before, all the experiences we have, and from the past and to the present. So that's why historical thinking or historical consciousness is so important. Also, that's why history matters so much in order to become an empowered citizen, which is active today. We're talking about, within history didactics, this historical consciousness as one of the most important terms. We also talk a lot about historical culture, because when we talk about historical consciousness in a society, it's hard for a society to have a consciousness, but they have a culture. Memorials, monuments, museums. How do we use history? What kind of historical culture is around us all the time? So these two is together, the culture and the consciousness about history. I was asked in particular to say something about how history can contribute to citizenship education. Just a minute. There has already been much talk about history and human rights education here, but it has almost all of it been about how we talk about the Holocaust. I think if you think that citizens should be empowered, then you have to think to broaden the scope, also when it comes to human rights education, to see that we need much more than learning, teaching students about human rights and democracy, what it has been like before and what it is now. So some historians, like Keith Barton, he says he doesn't want to say how history can contribute to the, citizenship education, but I want to do it anyway, to try to figure out some of the points in which history is useful for making critical thinking and empowered citizens. First of all, it's about knowledge about historical conditions for and development of democracies. That's the easiest part of teaching in some sense. We talk about how the UN Declaration of Human Rights came. We talked about Magna Carta in 1215 and how civil rights have been developed. That's not so very difficult in some sense. We also talk about struggles and revolutions, and that's important in particular because we need the actors' perspectives in a revolution history. Revolutions don't happen. Someone has made it happen. It's people in there. And women did not get the right to vote. Some women fought for it. No one was kind enough to give it to them. That's a way of teaching about revolutions. It's people in there doing things happen for the better. And then we have critical analysis of historical sources and texts. It was mentioned by Sandra earlier that perhaps this method of criticism of sources is the one thing that, and only thing that history can contribute to human rights education, but I think that's wrong. And one of the reasons is that one thing is assessing critically sources, like one old document, what is in it, is it true or is it not, who were the author, and so on and so on. What we really need is to qualify students' ability to read text, present text, critically. And in our recent books from Nils and me, we pay strong attention to the students, that students should really read their textbook in history critically. What's in my textbook of history and what's out? Who is mentioned, who is not? How many women are in the illustrations? What is said about this revolution? Why didn't they say that? And so on and so forth. That's a form of critical analysis of sources, because our textbooks are sources, as well as documents about human rights, and what is emphasized and what's not. Then historical consciousness, as I've already said, that the students are producers and products of history. And that's, as I said, important for this empowerment we all need to be ordered to be active citizens within democracy and for human rights. And then we have this anti-determinism perspective in history. History shows that things and events just happen. No, it is people and actors who make things happen. This means that social changes might have been different if people had wanted that and had acted different. And similarly, development and changes of today is not predetermined. It is possible to influence the further development or defend good values we already have. And that's very central, not anti-determinism. The development and changes, they don't fly in from outside. Someone make them. Then we have the next, that history contributes to giving more perspectives and comparisons available about the world, single societies, larger societies. So what is similar and what is different from societies in the past? The ability to analyze present society in light of societies in the past is a possibility. And a crucial point here is that it's less risky to compare societies of the past than to compare societies of today. It's this time lag. History is a foreign country, but it's there. It's in the past. So that's one of some of the points. But I have some more. Oh my God! Sorry. We have this multi-perspectivity as a goal. One historical event or phenomena can, of course, be seen from a variety of perspectives. According to many national curricula, the students shall learn to see and assess events and phenomena from different angles. Sometimes history can function better than social studies when it comes to controversial themes. The past seems less dangerous than the present because it is over, closed, finished. And then we have this coherence and breadth of outlooks to have an overview or see the wholes of society. The big pictures is also important, and causal explanations, which we also need for understanding the world of today. Identification, you have already talked about, and it is possible through history because you can come close to people and groups and individuals. So we can identify ourselves with. So that's important with identification, both to foster historical consciousness as well as empathy. And empathy is the next. By looking at people in the past to try to figure out how they had, how their lives were, how they felt, and so on. And then we have this, that was empathy. Learning from history. It's already said here, we can learn something from history. Not everything, but sometimes. We just sit in this building and, we have some lessons learned. There's one thing in particular I want to mention, which is important in history. History is full of contradictions, controversies, and conflicts. That's what brings the world forward, in some sense. And I think that's perhaps the most important thing with how history education can contribute to get more critical thinking citizens. And why is that? Because one of the things I miss very much in this talk about democratic education or human rights education is the lack of controversy. That's a problem. We all agree that human rights are so important, democracy is so good, and we want the students to be critical, but what should they be critical about? If they don't know anything. Knowledge is crucial, but it is also that it's not. Of course, we can just sit and see all the hate speech. Oh, our classroom is so good. We all agree upon human rights. And democracy, and we know that some of our students will go out and then be a part of the hate speeches. And why? I think one of the teachers' most important roles is to promote controversies within the classroom in order to make the students able to do an argumentation with people they disagree with. Now we are too afraid of conflicts and controversies, so we don't discuss. The teachers don't discuss things in the classroom. And we have to qualify the argumentation of pupils. We have to foster the ability to speak and to talk about good arguments and less good arguments, to qualify it by looking at facts. What do you say? What do you really mean? Do you agree? Disagree? What is the difference? How can you make your argument better in a sensible sense? Do you have facts? And so on and so forth. And looking at the case, not at the persons you talk with, but what are you really discussing? And that's the biggest lack we have today. And I think our largest challenge when it comes to history teaching or teaching at all is that we need teachers that is more political competent to do that kind of teaching, to have these discussions done in the classroom. Then we can hope for getting something to do something with the hate speech in society.